Hello, welcome Waterstones customers. Welcome to Cathy talking about her amazing novel, which is this. Everyone is Still Alive. It's such a fantastic book. It's an absolute triumph, Cathy. You must be so pleased with it. Once I picked it up, I could not put it down. And I'm not just saying that, I really couldn't. I cared about every single character. I feel like they're all my friends now. And what inspired you to write it?
Well, I'm very glad that you felt that way about it. I wanted to write about I suppose, the reality of life with small children and kind of married life. Not necessarily married.
Yeah.
People didn't have to be married to each other, but kind of like quite conventional couples doing things in a quite conventional way,
Yeah.
and what that felt like underneath, and the sort of almost like the secret lives of the secret lives of that sort of thing. Because of course I'd gone. My son's 12 now, but all the time he was littler than that. I sort of went through the whole class parties and the antenatal classes and all that, and I just kept thinking, this is just so weird. This is just so strange.
And of course, we all have, when we go through sort of being a parent, is that you've got your public face, what everybody sees at the school gates, where you look like you're coping brilliantly, and you've got your inner private world, which is like, I'm not doing this right, I'm failing at this, and you depict those two things absolutely brilliantly.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it, isn't it? That way of, I felt that, well, having a child catapults you into so many things. I think it brings up anything you've not dealt with. So you might think you're no longer bothered about the fact that, when you were 7, people weren't that nice to you. But when you then take your 7-year-old to school and see people not being nice to him in the same way, that will like bring everything raring back. So I think it brings up anything that you've not dealt with. And I think I definitely felt pitchforked actually into sort of conformity. Because I just didn't want to scare the horses most of the time. I went from not really caring, I don't think, that much about what people thought of me, to being really preoccupied, even from the point of like the midwife's coming round, everything must be clean so she doesn't take the baby away. Later on, I just would say weird stuff at the school gates and then think like, how do I get that observation back inside me so that these people don't decide I'm bonkers and then like not let their child play with mine. It's so strange.
I think we've all been there if we're parents, and if we're not parents, I really recommend this book, because all sort of traditional novels kind of finish at happily ever after. If you think of Jane Austen or Jane Eyre, it's the happily ever after bit. But what happens after happily ever after? Well, you have to read your book to find that out. And there's not that many books, to my, traditionally that tackle that in such a great way. You see like, oh, we'll have a baby and everything will be lovely. Not, oh, we'll have a baby and my psyche will be ripped apart by the whole thing. There's a character in your novel called Liam, who is in fact a sort of, I don't know, he is writing a novel about all the characters in the street. So I was wondering, are you Liam? Are you a bit of Liam there?
Yeah, I think Liam is a bit of an alter ego, I think. And he started out, he didn't start off as a character in the novel. He actually started out because when I was feeling unconfident writing something else, one of the sort of mind hacks I tried was I thought, I'm just going to imagine a slightly different person and send them in to do it for me. So I imagined Liam. I made him, he was the same age as me, also half Irish, also like working class and from the north, but have somehow suddenly living with all these nice posh people, and kind of both a bit chuffed with that, but also not quite sure what to do about it sometimes. And I made him finish my second book, and he did it very efficiently.
Oh, excellent.
Then I thought, this is great. I've cracked the secret of writer's block. I've got Liam. So I started him writing something else, and he just got completely stuck and down tools. And
I
so then
do.
eventually,
What he kind of does in the book
which
too.
does, yeah, I put him into the book, and then in an earlier draft, a lot of it was Liam's thoughts, and it kind of wasn't really working, because I find writing and writing process really interesting, but I think there's a limit to how interesting it is on the page.
Yeah.
So I thought, actually, I think this is going to be more interesting if I let Liam's wife have some of the perspective. And so then, so Liam and Juliet are both, to a certain extent, versions of me. And I think I both am an annoying writer, and I'm exasperated with myself for being an annoying writer. So Liam gets to be the annoying writer, and his wife gets to be pissed off with him. They're both sort of versions of me, I think. But that's just the origins, and then of course they completely grow into being their own thing, and I forget all about how it came about until people ask me interesting questions, and I remember.
On the spot. So this happily ever after theme, and it's not particularly happily, is it? It's sort of like managing ever after, or coping ever after, or not coping ever after, but as the title implies, everyone is still alive. So
Yeah,
is that supposed to imply the bottom line? Is that the goal when we're parenting? They're still alive.
I think it's a good thing to remind ourselves of. So I think one of the hardest things about being quite, also I really specifically didn't want my characters to have any big problems. They're all broadly fortunate. I mean, some of them think that they don't have enough money, but I mean they do really.
Yeah.
They're all broadly fortunate. I intentionally didn't give them any big problems, and I think almost the thing in that situation then is just this dreadful fear that you're doing it wrong. And a friend of mine said, actually, I was talking to a friend of mine, and she said she'd been watching this documentary, and a woman in it had said, she said, I just don't know what wealthy parents of healthy children worry about. And my friend says, we worry that that's all going to be taken away. And I thought that was just really interesting. And I do think worry, whether that's kind of fretting all the way through to anxiety, I think is just one of the great difficulties of modern life and how we cope with that. And I think it's incredibly easy to get sucked into sort of, I mean, I catch myself I'm always saying to my husband, we've got to remember that this doesn't really matter. It feels important, schools it's important, whatever. But this actually doesn't matter. This doesn't matter at all. We've got to remember that we've got to stay focused on what does matter, rather than being encouraged, for example, to always be seeing our child as a problem. And I think that's what you get sucked into this awful stuff, kind of through education, and also through, again, the promise of mother care, that the perfect happiness is only the right purchase away. And if only you get the right travel system pram, or if only you get the right mobile, through to if only you have the right whole class party, or you go on the right play dates, or you do the.
And then there's if only you don't buy too much stuff.
Yeah.
And then your kid wants too much stuff. They want another unicorn and a bigger dinosaur. And you try to get it right. There's such beautiful detail in the book when Juliet, one of the characters in the book, thinks she'll make everything okay by buying these dinosaur fridge magnets because her son loves dinosaurs, and she gets them. She says, I'm going to put them on the fridge for him, he'll love it, and the fridge isn't magnetic. And that is a lovely metaphor for how you think parenting is going to be and how it really is. Have you got a copy of this with you at the moment?
Yes.
Would you like to open it at random, not too near the end, we don't want any spoilers, and give us maybe a 5 or 10 minute reading? Am I springing that on you? Is that too frightening?
Oh, slightly. I'm not used to reading it, so
you'll enjoy it.
Yeah.
At random. I did it earlier on. Anywhere you open it is brilliant.
Okay, well, I'll do it then. I'll honestly do it at random.
Not too near the end. We don't want
We don't want anything. I see what you mean. We don't want it after the big incident. So, right. So, let's go. Juliet wakes with a start, knowing there is something on her mind. Is it work? Home? What day is it? Friday. Oh, yes, she thinks, sinking back into the pillow. It's my birthday. She's 45. She lies there listening to Liam's breathing. Her birthday is also the anniversary of the first time they woke up together. Liam used to make a fuss of her on both accounts, but those sorts of celebrations have fizzled out. She doesn't want to do anything this year anyway. She feels too raw, too orphaned to celebrate the day of her birth, now that the woman who brought her into the world is no longer here. Since having Charlie, she has thought birthday celebrations are the wrong way round, that it should be mothers rather than their offspring who are fated and given treats. She used to text her mother to say thank you. Last year, she took her out for lunch in Soho. Afterwards, they strolled arm in arm through the bustling streets. They didn't know anything was wrong then. They thought they had years of lunches and walks and celebrations ahead of them. A sad little noise escapes her. She gets up. Juliet is out of the door as usual before either Liam or Charlie are awake. Through the gloom, she sees Mrs. Carigi on the other side of the road and slows her pace to avoid any awkwardness about whether they might walk together as far as the school. She walks past Lucy's and then Sarah's. She knows so much about these women now. Every night when she comes home, Liam tells her snippets from their lives. He refers to them as the Magnolia Wives, though only Lucy and Sarah live on their road. Helen has a first-floor flat on one of the less smart streets. It's like Monopoly, Liam says. Sarah would be Regent Street. Her house is much bigger. It's not a terrace. It was built in one of the gaps left by the bombing. And it's smarter because Stephen loves home improvements and gadgets. They've just finished converting the loft and he yearns for an underground extension, but Sarah won't let him. Helen is Old Kent Road. She and Dan were about to move out of London when she met Sarah and Lucy and forced him into staying and getting a bigger mortgage than they could really afford. Though house prices have gone up so much, it turned into a financially astute move. Where are we in this game of Monopoly? Juliet asked him. Orange, or red, I guess, with Lucy, but we're not playing. Or maybe we are, but at least we know it's a game. Helen doesn't. Usually when Liam gets fixated with a new idea, he goes to a bookshop and buys himself a stack of background reading and starts talking wistfully about research trips. This time the material is under his nose. Juliet can't complain, and she did tell him to get to know the mothers, and he is less grumpy than he was before the move and seems quite content with the daily routine he shares with the Magnolia Wives. They go out for coffee most mornings after drop-off and often take the children to the park after school. Last weekend, Lucy drove Liam and Charlie to Freddie's birthday party in her enormous 4x4. Liam said it was the oddest feeling to sit so high above the rest of the traffic. That must be why rich people like them, he said, the feeling of superiority. I did tell her that I hoped the revolution didn't happen while I was in her passenger seat, that I didn't want to end up on the sharp spike of a pitchfork for accepting a lift. How did she take that? Asked Juliet. Thought it was funny. She's a good laugh, actually. Sometimes Juliet feels a bit envious of Liam's life in the street, but mostly she's glad that she gets to head out into the world. Even today, on her birthday, she's looking forward to presenting the final campaign deck to one of her largest clients. She's proud of the work. That was sort of completely like out of the blue, something I've not read aloud before. And I've imagined Liam's Yorkshire accent in my head, but I've never tried to read it before, so I don't know how that went.
Absolutely lovely. And what I really liked about that was Juliet's sadness because she's bereaved. I really like that sort of thinking and worrying about stuff, and yet, oh, I've got a job, I'm doing it. And that bit is what we all tend to concentrate on. Nobody concentrates enough, to my mind, on the domestic. Mm-hmm. And this just shows the importance of the domestic. And it's so gentle, the way the whole story unfolds. It's like a flower opening.
That's very kind.
I just absolutely love it. There's so many tiny little observations in it on, like, for instance, Juliet does things like assume her son needs time to settle into the new house. But, you know, it's his granny's house. It's her late mother's house. And he goes, no, I don't. And we always sort of project our fantasies and our feelings onto our children, and they think completely different to us, and you've just managed to observe that all the way through so well. I also liked how you how all the mothers fretted about their children. Like there's one child that even I started fretting about when I was reading the book, which was Freddie.
Poor little Freddie, yeah.
Tell me a bit about Freddie.
Well, so Freddie's parents is well, Freddie's parents are Helen and Dan, and they're I would say they're the least happy couple by quite a long way. And Helen is the bleakest character. So yeah, like she's her interior world is very dark, but she's the least sort of secure person amongst the friendship group. So she's always trying to pretend everything's okay, but she's very worried. She's very worried about everything. And I think I try not to sort of psychologically diagnose my characters, but I will now. What I think's happening is that somehow her massive worries about herself and her inadequacy in the group means that she's sort of projecting that onto her son, and she's worrying that he's going to make himself unlikable in the group. And that just, and I have sort of seen people do this. And I read this really sad problem that somebody had written into a newspaper problem page recently, not yours, where this woman was saying like, my 7-year-old is violent and he's this and he's that. And I read it and it was so sad, but I could really clearly see that this poor woman is just very, I think the kid probably just needs to run around in a big field non-stop for a long time, but she's desperate to almost like make it be that he's the problem in the family. But I reckon if you dug into that family, I think because when adults are keeping
just a symptom of it.
Yeah, when adults are keeping secrets, like Dan and Helen have this deeply unhappy marriage and they're not talking to each other about it and they're not showing it to other people. I think the kids know, don't they? So it kind of like, sometimes it sort of erupts out of the child because the child doesn't know that they're supposed to be keeping secret about the fact that they're unhappy.
Yeah.
But I like Freddie, and I did, again, I just want to, I do tend to feel like this about my characters, all of them, whatever their things are. I just want to like scoop them up, get them a really nice therapist, sort them out, and give them a bit to run around with. Or
I'm looking forward to getting Freddie in my consulting room as soon as he's 18.
Yeah. But yes, he does things like, well, he bites someone, I think. And
he hits and bites quite a lot because he's not been told the truth, so he's quite angry. This is me analysing.
Yeah.
And something isn't quite right in the home. Something's not true. Children are really astute at picking up lies and insincerity. And I think middle-class people can be particularly prone, I'm sure I'll get killed for this, particularly prone for pretending everything's lovely. All right, darling. And children don't react well to insincerity. They need authenticity. And you showed Not Tell that brilliantly with Freddie acting out the pain of his parents' marriage.
Yeah,
that was
I do know people who say, and if I know them well enough so that it's not annoying, I do try to gently suggest it. But they'll just keep going on about one of their kids, like what terrible person they are. I mean, not quite, but I just answered like, oh, we've been wondering if we should get them a counselor. It's like, well, do you think you should maybe sort yourselves out a bit first? That's the thing, isn't it?
I say in my book, which I'm just giving a little gentle plug to now. Thanks, darling. If you think you've got a problem with your child, look at your relationship with your child, because that's where you'll find your answer.
Yeah.
And I think you showed that so perfectly in the book. I mean, your book is just one big case study for my book, which is, all the different case studies are there. It's just fantastic.
Well, when I read your book, I thought, yes. It was extremely useful to me in practically just for, being in my family and with my child. But I did also think like, this is exactly what I'm trying to show in my novel, like the stuff about, can I quickly find a quote? This bit, I kept reading, it's really marked. I kept reading bits out to my husband. That's how we communicate. I read out to him from useful books and he listens, which is very nice. There are no advertisements showing ordinary looking people working through their demons, learning to accept inevitable pain and finding their spontaneity and joy in that way. And look, I've done, can you see? I've done an exclamation mark for
Lovely.
the heart thing.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of adverts of people in gorgeous kitchens drinking wine, but
And I think there's that idea. I think people it's very easy to get sucked into the idea that you just need the thing, and the thing can be, so, you know, that the happiness is only a
it can
purchase.
be an Arga, look like that. There's an
Yeah.
Arga.
It can be
Yeah.
the type of holiday. It can be, well, it can be anything really. I mean, sometimes I think one of the reasons why novelists have a hard time, people have a hard time when they publish their first book, because they've often thought that publishing the first book is going to solve all their problems. Some people are the same with getting married or having a baby. They think it's something they're in pursuit of.
Yeah.
And I think it's the thing that's going to sort of fill the existential void.
Right.
And it
It's
doesn't.
something outside of us that we think if only we had it, us would be complete.
Yeah.
But actually, it's a lot easier than that, or a lot more difficult, but certainly different.
Yeah. And I think you get into real trouble in your family if you start telling yourself that all your problems are because there's something wrong with your child and the way your child is behaving and the way your child is being in the world.
Or there's something wrong with your wife, or there's something wrong with your husband. I mean, let's face it, there's a lot wrong with all of us. That's not the point.
Yes.
The point is we need to understand and forgive each other, and especially understand.
Yeah, and work hard, that it's going to involve a bit of graft. You know, I think that's the other thing, that we've sort of been sold this idea that I'm really fascinated with extravagant weddings. And again, Juliet has an assistant in the book, and the assistant's organising a hen night. So I loved all that. I was desperate to sort of send her off on the wedding, but I really liked talking about, you know, dove releases and all that stuff. So these sort of astonishing, extravagant weddings, and you think it's just surely setting everyone up for the whole thing of like, oh, well, now the wedding's over. Who's going to take out the bins? That's married life, in my experience. Not so much when you don't have a child. It's just children come with so much work. Again, the way we talk about them in our culture, it's like they're an accessory. We're going to get this accessory and we're going to dress it in the same clothes as we have and all that. And just like the volume of how much work there is to do, I think it's such a shock.
And how much that you're taken away from your own thoughts and your own mind. Because how many times does Charlie hijack Juliet with his flights of fancy so she can't have her own thoughts?
Yeah.
And then you don't want your husband's thoughts because you're full of your child's thoughts, so you push your husband away, and then we start assuming things about each other. And I thought you showed this beautifully in your book, that when communication breaks down, we don't stop having a relationship with someone. We have that relationship in our imagination, in our heads, which is what Juliet does with Liam. And she imagines he's like this or like that, or thinking this or thinking that, but she does not check it out. Not for a while, anyway.
It was really fun to write that. And one of the things I love about, I'm really enjoying everything about reader response.
You tricked me when you wrote that. You tricked me. I went along with Juliet's assumptions, and I had to look at me and how I make assumptions. So, you know, I was guilty as charged by you.
People often say to me like, oh, I really hated Liam at the beginning. And then later on, I thought, hang on a second, it's me.
Oh,
That is fun. So that was fun. It was fun to do, and it's fun to hear about people, how people experience it. Not that Liam isn't annoying in lots of ways, but I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? Everyone's annoying. Who's not annoying? Oh, and certainly, if I sometimes think about that and say that actually with my very good girlfriends, we sort of often say things like, oh, I wish I was shacked up with you and life wouldn't be so difficult. And then we sort of agree that actually, if we were having to put up with each other all the time, then probably we'd find each other very annoying.
To be even worse. If you don't even fancy them, it'd be terrible. I'm just going to read out some of the comments now. Ashley McLennan says to the panelists, I was tricked too. Very good writing. Yeah. I hope we're not giving too much away of the fact we get tricked. Somebody says, is this going to be available on audio? I can assure you that it is available on audio, because that's something I checked myself. Deirdre Hannon says, there's so much going on culturally in the UK and parents are under so much pressure to keep up appearances. It's very genuinely difficult for you all. Well, thanks for your sympathetic response to us, Deirdre. We like that. Has anybody got a question for Cathy? Because I think we've got, oh yes, there's Q&A. I've got to click a different bit on my screen. Q&A, I've got one. Oh, I've already answered it. Please, will this be released as an audio to listen to, as I really struggle to physically read? Yes, it is available, Deirdre. No, you don't have to apologise, Deirdre. Deirdre's apologised. We love you, Deirdre. We're glad you're here. You don't have to say sorry. Has anybody else got a question for Cathy? And while you're thinking of a question for Cathy, I'll ask you one. How do you write such a brilliant novel? How do you write such a brilliant novel? I was going to say novels, but this is your first novel, isn't it?
Yeah, it is my first one. I mean, it's really kind of you to say it's brilliant. It took me an awful long time.
It is brilliant. I'm not kind.
Okay, that's kind of even better, isn't it? Yeah. It did take me a very long time, and it does. I put a lot of work and thought into it, and I find it. I mean, as in, this is good for the novel. I'm not necessarily convinced it's good for life. I just don't really turn off. I'm unable not to notice things. I'm quite uncomfortable to live with in that sense. I was having a thing with my husband after the book was finished, and we had the dishwasher broke, and which I do find kitchen appliances very stressful, and I always find this amazing, like, because it's not can afford a new dishwasher, so why is it so awful when the dishwasher breaks? But it is. I find it a very, very stressful situation.
It's time.
Yeah, and it's kind of, I don't know, it's the promise that they're all supposed to be labor saving, these devices, and then you're always having to kind of like coax them with rinse aid and salt, and if you don't rinse the plates properly, they break, and then you think that's probably your fault, and you're you're not being environmentally friendly. I don't know what it is. Anyway, I get in this circle of horror about it. The new dishwasher came, and then we were both, my husband and I, like by the dishwasher, sort of looking at it and not able to work it out. And of course, neither of us wanted to read the manual, because who wants to read a manual? But he would want to read it slightly more than me. So I slightly felt like, why was he asking me how it worked? I didn't know how it worked, and I wasn't definitely not going to read the manual. So we were in this like stand-up kind of, every so often one of us would press a button and nothing would happen. And then I said to him, and you could just tell like the tension somehow in this situation. I said to him, I said, this is just like a scene from my novel. At which point he gave me quite a dirty look. And it was absolutely that marital moment. He gave me what I perceived to be a dirty look, which might not have been. He gave me what I perceived to be the dirty look. And I thought, well, fuck you then. And we've gone from looking at the dishwasher to me kind of, like sort of full aggression activated.
This is what happens because our family are the only people around. And when we feel frustrated or bad, we naturally look around for someone to blame, which makes your book very entertaining. It's not very pleasant when you're doing it to each other outside the dishwasher, but
no, and we're quite good at it. Did then sort of calms both down, and he also does say he thinks it's quite funny that, so whenever we have anything now, usually the moment when we go from the bridge between rupture and repair, as you explain so well in your book, somewhere on the way from rupture to repair, there's a joke from one of us about how this will end up in a novel at some point.
Like, that's a good family joke.
Yeah, so that is quite a good. That's quite a good joke. My son was we've got this scheme. I've no idea whether this is brilliant or awful. We've got this scheme that we think, well, my husband and I have decided it would be good for all of us if we went on some coastal walks, right? We live on the coast. Why don't we go and experience nature? Why don't we try and do it? Let's go on a coastal walk every Sunday. So far, my son's not that chuffed about this. And the other day he was speculating, like, what if it's really windy? What if it's so windy that one of us might get blown over the edge? And I said, that means it'll be game over for me if I'm the one blown. I said, but if it's you or Daddy, I'll probably write a book about it.
Thanks, guys. I need the material.
So that was quite funny. He did think it was funny.
I've got a question from Ashley McLennan. Will there be a sequel where we hear about the teenage years?
Oh, that's a great question. So there's not quite a sequel, but I am writing another novel which is sort of set in the world of, and two of the characters, Stephen and Sarah, there's one very small mention in it. We know that Stephen has a sister because when they're talking about advent calendars, he talks about how they had a paper religious one and he had to share it with his sister. Anyway, that sister is the main character of the next novel.
Oh, interesting. Can't wait.
And Stephen and Sarah and their house and their kids get to, I don't know whether this will stay, but at the moment, because again, I write a lot and then a lot gets crossed out and what have you. So at the moment, I have been writing this morning a dinner party scene, and Liam and Juliet are in that as well.
Oh, I can't wait to meet them all again. I just want to hang out with them.
They're all talking about marriage and whether anyone can be bothered to have affairs and all that sort of stuff. So,
oh, fantastic. Here's a question from Alice. What is the one book you think everyone should read in their lifetime?
That's a really good question, Alice. I mean, I've always struggled with this because I don't even have a favorite book. I sort of have like 100 favorite books, and it's on a different.
I think it's your other book that Alice needs, which I forgot what it's called. The Memoir in Literature. What is that?
Oh, Dear Reader.
Dear Reader.
Yeah.
Kathy has written a book called Dear Reader about all the books that Kathy has read that impacted her in a big way, and it's your individual journey, but it overlaps such a lot with mine that it was almost like you were talking to me about old friends.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, it was really lovely. So I really recommend you not only buy this, but also Dear Reader by this author, because it will tell you what to read.
It did slightly come about because once you write a book, people are always asking you for your favorite books or your desert island books or your whatever, and I never felt there was enough. I've just done this thing for The Guardian, which is 10 books about bookworms, but I struggled to narrow it down to 10. I wanted to do 16 books or 20 books. So, and it's one of my favorite things to do. I find it very calming to make lists, to think about books in that way, like around a theme. Books that have this particular thing going on, or books that are about artists or whatever. So that's how I comfort myself. Yeah, when I'm not noticing minute details of my own domestic setup, so I can put them into contemporary novels. I'm making book lists.
One thing about Alice's question is I could not narrow my reading list down to one book. It's always the last book I've read that I'm really fond of. So I can't give you just one book. I can only give the last book I've read, which is that. Well, that was the last good book I've read anyway. Kate wants to know, how long did it take to write? You said a long time, but we need specifics, Kathy. How long?
So I started writing a novel. I'd written lots of novels before, never finished any of them. And in 2015, when my first book came out, my publisher bought from me a novel. So that was in 2015. I threw the first version of it away about a year later, and then wrote two other fairly full drafts that had some of these characters in, but were really different. And then came back to this one. And I think it took so long because I have a very, I always quite like that question of where do you get your ideas from? Because actually writers laugh about that question, but I'm just hoovering up ideas all the time. Yeah. So I have a very big ideascape, if you like. Yeah. And what I find really difficult is narrowing it down. So a lot of those early drafts, they were sort of, it's almost like they were preoccupation soup. I was just chucking. I teach memoir writing now, and I really notice it in my writers that so often people that are writing their first thing they're kitchen sinking it, they're chucking everything in. Yeah. And that's what I was doing in the earlier drafts, really working it out what it was I wanted to say, and also what it was I was prepared to say. I am a bit superstitious. I've sort of learnt to be. I'm a bit superstitious about making things happen in fiction, because a few times I've made something happen in fiction and then it's been reflected in my real life. So I felt very superstitious about anything too awful happening to any of the children. And in one of my earlier drafts, it did.
Well, I'm glad that one didn't come out then.
Me too.
I would have been really upset.
Yes, yeah.
Quite upset as it was, but you know.
Yeah. So I just kind of went so far and no further, I feel, in this.
You've answered the second part of Kate's question, which was, and what's the thing you learnt that you can apply to writing the next one when you wrote this one? I think you've sort of answered that. It's like, don't throw absolutely everything at it, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I think as you write more, you get to realise this is fine. I can have lots of books, or maybe some of these ideas end up as an essay, or they end up as something else. I don't have to try and cram everything into the same thing. And I do think the second novel, I think, is going to take me a lot less time, because I think actually I've done quite a lot of the work for it already. So although I haven't done the words for it, I had the idea for it whilst I was writing this one, and I've done quite a lot of the thinking on the background.
What's it called? Do you know yet?
I have got a title for it. It's called Ordinary Time.
Oh, I really like that.
Whether you like that. Shall I tell you why? So my character in this one is a vicar's wife. And in the liturgical year, they have these, I'm not good at explaining this yet. I'll be better when I've got the novel done. In the liturgical year, they have different periods of time, and ordinary time is what's called so it's the year between Pentecost and Advent. It's called ordinary time because there are no big festivals and no big things. Right. And so I really like the idea of that. So the novel opens at the beginning of ordinary time. So her husband is preaching a sermon and they always have different colours. So the colour of ordinary time is green. So he's got this green stole on and she's watching him preaching at the front of the church. Their son next to her fidgeting. She's trying to keep him still because she knows that his fidgeting annoys his dad and all that. And looking at her husband preaching and thinking, he's so good up there. How is he so charismatic when he's up there? And how is he so not charismatic when he's at home and all that? And he talks about and then I'm hoping the time span will then go in the novel up to Advent. But also the other sort of meaning is that, again, it's going to be set just pre-pandemic, where people don't know there's a pandemic coming. So again, the characters don't know that they are living in an ordinary time, but the reader knows.
Brilliant.
So that's my idea. You could tell me, all of you, whether you like the sound of it, or maybe
I love the sign of a pandemic novel. I think that sounds great. Jane asks, I've enjoyed seeing you interview other authors, Cathy, at the Cheltenham Literary Festival. How is it being on the other side?
That's a great question. It's a really different feeling. When I'm interviewing someone, it's a professional thing. I read the work and I think about the work and I prepare for it. And it feels like, and I like doing it because I think I am good at it. I feel competent. I feel good at something. The thing about writing is, I find I don't feel competent when I'm writing. I don't feel good at anything. I feel like an idiot blundering through a blizzard, not knowing what they're doing, and it can be quite difficult and miserable to tolerate how long you have to be alone to do it, I think. So I really like interviewing because I feel like, when I go to Cheltenham, for example, I have all my books sent to me and I've got them in a little special case and I go off on the train and I feel all good. When I'm being interviewed, I feel that all I have to do is show up and give honestly of myself. And I just put myself in the hands of whoever I'm with and let it be what it will be.
I wish I felt professional about it. I don't do this very often, so I don't. Janine wants to know, who do you think, Cathy, writes well about family life, apart from us, of course?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The quote I used at the beginning of the book is a David Lodge quote. He says, literature is mostly about having sex and not much about having children. Life is the other way around. And I used to think about that. I've always liked that quote. I used to think about it a lot when I had a when I had my little baby at home. And it is really difficult writing about family life, because it is difficult to capture. So it's slightly difficult to capture the boredom without being boring. I mean, it's quite hard. There were times when I would think like, it's that thing of like, so the character is in a situation they find boring. How do you write about that in a way that's not boring for the reader? Which is of course possible, but sometimes it was a bit tricky. And sometimes I did think like, oh, this round of parties, I took out a couple more class parties because I just thought, like, I don't know how much tolerance.
You couldn't bear to live it again.
I couldn't cope with another round.
I was not bored for what I was not bored for 1 second, because I was reading it and recognizing things from my own life that maybe I didn't notice. So you made them interesting by the way you talked about my life that I hadn't noticed. It was wonderful. So you're good.
I haven't answered the question about who writes well about family life, because I'm not sure I know. I think I've read a few novels recently that I thought were very good, that are from an outsider perspective on a family. So Luster by Raven Leilani. But again, it's written from the perspective of a young woman who starts having an affair with the father of this family. And also that Kylie Reid novel, Such a Fun Age. Again, she's the babysitter. So we're seeing the family from the babysitter's perspective. So I think it is difficult to write from within the perspective of the family. One of my favorite novels, is a very controversial novel, and lots of people really, really hate it. Lots of women really hate this novel, is Intimacy by Hanif Kureishi. And again, so the character is a writer called Jay, and it all takes place in the 24 hours leading up to him making the decision whether or not he's going to leave his partner and their 2 sons. And it's really brutal. Emotionally brutal. But I think he really captures something about it's called Intimacy because the partner makes him go to see this awful therapist who makes him read a crap poem aloud, which I always really enjoy.
I must have that down as one of like that one.
And he talks, I think, in the therapy session about there not being any excitement, and she says, but there are other good things, there's intimacy, and he just thinks like, oh. So yeah, but I'm struggling to think of someone who writes well about just like normal family life. But it's almost the point, to your point earlier, Philippa, about happily ever after. You just don't get happily married people in fiction. So if you meet someone happily married in a novel, and I can promise you this, so go out into the world and look at this. When you meet a happily married couple at the beginning of a novel, things are going to happen to them. So either one of them is lying to the other. So one of them's having an affair.
Yeah.
Wrong. And we're about to discover that. Or they're both lying to everyone. They might be Russian spies, or they might be burglars living in a nice street. And the only way they get to be happily married is if something terrible is about to happen to them as a unit. So like something could happen to their child or whatever. Or one of them is going to be killed off, and then it's about how the other one copes without them. But I promise you will struggle to find a novel in which a happily married couple just manage to
get by
for 70,000 words.
That's why your novel, I'm going to sell it again, is so good, is because that is so difficult to write about, and you've pulled it off brilliantly. Ashley asks, I would like to see Everyone Is Still Alive on the screen. Is there any possibility of that on the horizon?
Oh, not that I know of, Ashley. I mean, obviously I would as well. That would be wonderful. So please do tell all your influential filmmaking friends that they should put my novel on the screen, because that would be great.
It would be a fantastic sort of Mike Leigh type thing, only with a lot more love than he usually has to generate. That would be great. I thought that the subject matter was very, very similar to Motherland, but the treatment is very different. Mm-hmm. So Motherland, if you haven't seen it, is a comedy series about life at the school gates and life with small children. And the children don't have a part in it at all, really. It's really about how all the parents get on or don't get on, and the ghastliness of parties and things like that. But it's very cruel, and your book is not. Your book is more realistic, whereas Motherland's more caricatured. I mean, it's a different thing. It's trying to do something different. So it's not like one is good and one is bad. But because Motherland's been there, they'll wait a bit before they put yours on. I think.
I think it's interesting with kids because I really liked Catastrophe, but which I thought again got lots of things really right about the difficulty of life with small children. But like even in Catastrophe, getting it right, still the children in it are incredibly well behaved. They don't often seem to need to be changed. They're very compliant, and of course it has to be like that so that you have time to enjoy the drama of the adults doing the interesting things. I had to think really carefully about what age my children were going to be, because if they were younger, there'd be too much work to do for the parents, and if they were much older, I felt they would be too distinct as and individualized. So I kind of picked an age where I thought it would work for them to be fairly like generic. I didn't have to individualize each of them, but where they had enough. There was enough kind, they were going to school full time, so the parents had enough time almost to misbehave and have problems. And then also the couple we spend most time with is Juliet and Liam. Yeah. And it's not a coincidence that they have the simplest and best behaved child. Yeah. Because he needs to be well behaved, because if I realized that if I tried to have the couple we spend most time with being Freddie, then the action would be dominated by Freddie hit someone, Freddie's done this.
It's so interesting you should say this, and I say this with permission from my client, that I had a patient once who had a child and was horrified that it wasn't like it was on TV when the child is just brought on and then goes back to sleep to move the plot on a little bit, but is really always a minor character. And he was like so shocked because he hadn't read your books, he didn't know what it was like to be a parent. He was so shocked when it dominated his entire life. Yeah, because that's not how children are shown in literature, and that's not how they're shown on television usually. So that was quite interesting how literature had affected real life like that, because we are the stories we read. We've got 20 things under chat. I think a lot of them are just saying that was brilliant, Cathy, thank you. I'm joking. What else is there?
There's a nice one from Marianne who says intimacy caused ruptures in our book group. Years, decades later, some are still not speaking. Oh, that's brilliant.
Really? That's so interesting.
I love that.
All right. I can't find that one. No, I can't find that one. Oops, I'm going back to this one now. What have I missed? Sorry, I'm just going through all the things. It's like, isn't it? You turn up to an event and people are still playing on their phones. It's not what you're coming for, but it's just the nature of it. I can't play on my phone any longer, but I'm going to ask you a question, Cathy. Why is it that domestic life that you have so brilliantly depicted is so often overshadowed, overlooked, and not the subject of great fiction?
Well, probably because it did used to be more. I think it's difficult, as discussed a bit. It's difficult to do it. It's difficult to capture the boredom and the repetitive nature of it without being both boring and repetitive.
So it's difficult. Yeah, that's one reason.
But also not valued. So again, traditionally, the life inside the home isn't valued. What's valued is, and it used to be, the man going out into the world and having the interesting things and having the adventures. I've always been really interested in Oh, almost like that idea of the shadow narrative. So it's like the book would be like 4 men went off and they climbed this mountain, or they went to the North Pole, or they. And a question I've always wanted to know was like, did they have wives and did they have kids, and who was looking after the children? It's that question, isn't it? Who's looking after the children?
Yeah.
Because traditionally, men would go out and have complete lives and be their lives being fairly, if they wanted them to be, not particularly altered by having children. And so that would be kind of the dominant narrative wasn't particularly interesting. But also I think there's a great deal of taboo about speaking honestly about parenting, and I've thought a lot about why that is, and I think it's to do with the fact that well, you don't want to kind of go on about, I always felt I didn't want to you don't want to go on about how awful it is in front of somebody who might want children and can't have them. That would be terrible. That would be an awful thing to do. Nor do you, I've always felt this slight thing of tempting fate, so that if I were to ever admit that I find looking after a small child boring and repetitive, that almost like at the moment when I might say that, you know, maybe over a nice lunch or something with interesting people, that probably right that second my son is falling off the climbing frame.
Yeah.
And something terrible is going to happen to him, and it's going to be my fault because I didn't appreciate him when I had him. So that sort of idea, and I think there's all that kind of going on. I think also for the child, I think you well, this is how I see it at the moment, that you, in a way, I think that's completely surprising. You have a child and it is such an assault on the self, but it kind of, I just feel I should probably have surrendered to it a bit earlier. But once you've got the child, I think it's almost like you're not as important anymore. Like your first duty surely is to try to bring up that child, and you should put your attentions into that more than like endlessly banging on about how difficult it is. But I think this is all quite written in the body. I think even expressing it, I think is hard. It's hard for people to do.
And I mean, I understand why we don't write novels about going to the toilet, even though we all do it, because it can be pleasurable, but it's not particularly interesting. But so many people have children, so maybe people don't think it's interesting, but it so is. It might be boring to listen to the stories of the dinosaurs for the most millionth time, or whatever, or changing a nappy, or holding a baby that's teething that won't stop crying for hours and hours and hours. That might have some certain ennui to it, but you know, just draw out a little bit and it's the most interesting thing. It's the most fascinating thing, and it is uncharted territory on the whole in literature.
Yeah, and it's kind of, is anything more important really than, and that's
yes, is anything more important?
Yeah, like surely it's not. And I think that I think the most difficult thing about, for want of a better word, modern parenting, is how difficult it is, even with all the stuff I know, and I've written a book about it and had shed loads of therapy about it. It's still so difficult to remain focused and attached to what actually matters, which is that I've made this human, and it's now my duty and my job and my pleasure to help this human grow into being themselves, and that nothing else really matters. But it's incredibly difficult to stay there and not get sucked into, you know, compare and despair, and am I doing it right, and what am I getting
I
wrong?
love compare and despair. That's brilliant. And the other thing is, you've just described the complexity of one parent and one child, but of course there's millions of relationships, like the siblings, there's another parent, there's the step parent, there's the aunts, there's the granny, there's the dead granny. And this makes the domestic, I think, not only more interesting than anything else that happens, but actually everything happens as a result of the domestic. Because we are all brought up in the domestic, we become who we are in the domestic, and we tend to project our earliest family dynamic onto the world we find ourselves in. So we reenact our earliest domestic, but when we're not aware of that, because we haven't read enough novels about it, we think we're living life,
Yeah.
but we're not. We're repeating life.
I do find, because this sounds like I'm giving myself a massive compliment now. People often do say to me things like, you're very nice, you're very kind, you're very whatever. But the more I'm alive, the more I think I was just incredibly fortunate to be parented by my parents, who are just really, they're just really sort of good people who I didn't grow up ever feeling any sense of fear or worry or concern. So then even when you go out into the world and bad things happen, I just still do have a fundamental, like, even at and it's not that I haven't had periods of depression, but even through them, really, I still think I have a solid base from having had those early years of just very good, sort of good, honest parenting, really. And I think that if I am a good person in the world, a lot of it is just to do with the fact that I think it's the thing of optimism as well, which is another bit I really loved about your book. And I think it's really difficult to stay optimistic in this world, but it's just crucially important. We've got to be optimistic about our, again, once you've got a child, if you've got this child, you then have to be optimistic about their own abilities to be in the world, and possibly a little bit about the world itself. And it's difficult to do. But again, I think that the ability to be optimistic, I think, is because I fundamentally do believe in the goodness of people. But I can see that I believe in the goodness of people because that was my fundamentals. That was what my first experiences are. And when I've got lots of friends who didn't have that, it's harder for them.
It's so difficult to believe in the goodness of people if the people that were your earliest caregivers were sort of full of suspicion and distrust.
Yeah, and then trying to encourage people
their experiences are like that. It's not it's their fault, but that doesn't make it any easier.
No, and I think I do trust easily, but then I would, because trusting has worked for me. And I know people I know people where trusting is very difficult for them because trusting was not a good idea for them when they were small. So,
well, it's so wonderful that you have written a novel that perfectly mirrors what it is like to be at home alone with your partner and your kids, and also reflects what you're like when you're in public. And we've got those two sides and how they interact with each other, and how all the families with both these sides interact with each other. And you've shown so easily, if we're just a bit careless about one or two things, how it can descend into tragedy. And if we mend things that are misunderstandings and learn to communicate again, how we can ascend back into an okay life. And what a book, what a massive book it is. I think it's perfect. It makes me cry to think about it, how perfect it is. I don't do these interviews for everyone, Cathy. And you can probably tell this is the first one I've ever done.
It's wonderful. It's such a privilege to have your take on it, I think, and to be in this conversation with you and with all these delightful people here as well. And this is really now what I think it is about. I'm no longer really interested in like trying to get stuff or things. For me now, everything comes back to honest communication with other human beings. That's what I'm in it for. That's what I'm alive for. That's what I want out of the world. That's my reward. And I've had bags of that.
It's such a strong pull, that thing of, if I only had stuff. I'm thinking of Paul Helen in your book. Mm-hmm. If I only had stuff, I'd be fine. Sarah's got stuff. She's fine. And then Sarah might not be as fine as you thought.
Well, you might find out a bit more about that in the next book.
Anyway, there's another 11 questions and another 7 chats that I'm so sorry I haven't had time to look at, because otherwise I'm just doing this. I'm just doing this. Like, you see your friends and family did it. I think I've just deleted some emails by mistake with that. Cathy, thank you so very much for coming to talk about your book and the process of writing it. And are we allowed to go now?
I think we probably are. Stuart might come back and release us into the wild.
Or maybe you do some, hang on, from Waterstone events to all panelists and attendees. He says, yes. Please buy your books from Waterstones because they facilitated this nice chat. This is my kitchen, everyone. There you go. And that's your book line study. Gorgeous.
Yes, this is, and can I just say, because I'm very grateful to Waterstones because they've done this special edition, and it does have a bonus chapter in the back of the Waterstones edition, which is again, because I said I overwrite. So one of the chapters on the cutting room floor was from the point of view of the teacher, Amy Carigi.
I've got to buy that now.
Well, I will send you this one if you would like it.
No, I'll buy it. I want to support my favourite author. Okay, everybody, we are going to go now. It's been wonderful to have you here. Thank you for listening in. Bye, Cathy, and thank you for an amazing book.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you,
everybody.
everyone. Lots of love.